be nice to each other.
Yeah, I think that's a good thought. I mean, I think as a community, we could probably do a better job of that.
Yeah, and meet people on eye to eye as human beings. That's all that's necessary. The rest kind of comes from that.
Yeah, no, I like that. Like treating people like human beings
Yeah.
and just kind of seeing the humanity. That's good.
Yeah.
Welcome to the LabVIEW experiment. I'm your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. If you're a developer looking to unlock your potential and take your skills to the next level, then look no further. From freeing your imagination and experimenting with new ideas and workflows, to exploring aspects of software development you've never even considered before, I'm going to help you grow your craft so you can approach your work like an artist and have more fun with what you do. In my 15 years working with and training developers, I've helped dozens of individuals and organizations embrace a growth and learning mindset that allows us to overcome challenges and embrace failure as the essential learning experience it is. If you're ready for the philosophies, strategies, tips, and tricks that will unlock your creativity, then it's time to get to work. Hi, thanks for tuning into the LabVIEW Experiment podcast. We'd like to learn more about you, our audience, so we've put together a little survey. As a reward for filling out the survey, we're going to give away a few Visa gift cards. So use the link below to fill out the survey and get entered to win a gift card. So I am sitting here talking with Shane O'Neill. You may know him better as Intaris from the forums, if you're on the NI forums, which you should be, by the way. Good place to go and get information about LabVIEW and various things. Probably the only useful part of the NI website.
Yeah.
That's a side running
That's
joke
true.
if you've been around long enough. I met Shane. I see him post the forums. I met him a few years ago at GDevCon. We had some good times in Cambridge. Yeah, I remember most of them.
I remember some of it.
It was some crazy nights. Shane and I instantly got along because he's from Ireland originally, and my family's from Ireland, and so we talked a lot. And I think the Gaelic football thing or something was going on at that time, and we talked about that. And yeah, I'm not a Gaelic football fan by any means, but I just visited with some relatives in Ireland. They were going crazy about it. So welcome, Shane.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. So I think we were having a conversation first about just the community and community building and how we interact with people and how we treat each other, and just some thoughts about how we interact with NI. And I'd like to continue that conversation and hear some more of your thoughts on that.
Maybe just a little bit of background. I've been programming LabVIEW since about 1995, 1996. So before there was a undo option in LabVIEW, that long. I've been on the NI forums for a very long time, just as a reader, passively for a very long time. I learned a lot of what I know in LabVIEW on the NI forums. I'm very thankful for that and the people that took part in that. So in a way, I've kind of gotten to a situation now where I'm very critical of my own abilities, but even I'm willing to say now that I'm an advanced user of LabVIEW, I kind of know what I'm talking about. I'm very hesitant to ever say that about myself, but yeah, okay, I'm not bad at what I do at this stage. And a lot of that is due to interacting with people on the forums and learning on the forums. We were talking earlier about the community and getting new people in. And one of the first things that I went to was how the community seems to be changing, how the tone is maybe changing, and specifically with the NI forums, but not only the NI forums, also some things that I've witnessed in person, where I think that, I have a couple of issues with the direction that the tone is maybe going, that I think is not necessarily good for the long-term growth. I say this as someone, given the recent changes from NI, who's been very critical of NI.
Yep.
I mean, Eric has, rightfully so, told me basically to shut up on a couple of occasions.
Yeah, I think I've probably been on that side of it too.
Hold my hands up. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, it was overly critical with no positive input. I accept that. But the last couple of days, I've revised my opinion a little bit. And I think the fact that they were saying to you earlier that there were 3 years between the last GDevCon and this one, or 2 years between them, kind of gave enough time for things to change between seeing the community to kind of pick up on maybe some subtle differences that are happening. Things happen with me as well, personally, the same with everybody. I mean, we had this thing going around for a couple of years that everybody was affected by. And I just feel that the tone generally maybe 15 years ago was a lot more welcoming and a lot more accepting of kind of beginners and things like that. And I don't know if it's an unreasonable expectation to expect that to be maintained, because as the community advances and as we start dealing with more advanced topics, it's kind of hard to drop down to the beginner level all of the time and interface with that kind of question. So it's kind of a very human response. But I just feel that it's a component that I think has changed in the community.
Yeah, well, I think you had mentioned too, like the CLA summits, well, they're good and we spread all this technical knowledge. We're spreading it to like a limited set of people. Yeah. And particularly in the past, before we were videotaping and getting the videos out, it kind of built this like insular community.
Yeah. Yeah. So I need to say to that then as well that I have absolutely no LabVIEW qualifications now, aside from being a LabVIEW champion.
Yeah, if I had an FPGA problem, you're probably one of the, you or Terry are probably the two people I would call. So
Thanks.
Like I put both of you two on a pedestal as like, these are the FPGA gurus. So.
I don't like being put on a pedestal. I react badly to that.
Okay, yeah, but putting people on pedestals is always a bad thing. But like, yeah, I very much, you give off the impression that you very much know what you're doing. So I'm very
That's much unintentional. I don't like doing that. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, I wasn't critical of the CLA summit itself. It's obviously a tremendously useful thing, and people love going to it, and it's a worthwhile thing to have. I think the position where I was critical was that there was kind of a lack of exchange between what was being discussed at that level and us normal folk, if you want. Because I always felt that I knew enough of the background of the software engineering to discuss these topics with people, but I have no need for a qualification. I don't have the qualification. I can't take part. And for me, just purely from my own personal point of view, I would like to be involved in that type of discussion, but I felt there was kind of a barrier there. Yeah. And for me, GDevCon was a huge thing, because then suddenly that was for me, that's my CLA summit. And I really enjoy it. I think it's a tremendous thing for the community.
Yeah. But I mean, there are other barriers too. I think you mentioned like, for example, for those who don't know, like we have the LabVIEW Champions program, and there's some private forums where we can all talk amongst ourselves. And that is an issue actually, because we have discussions in there sometimes about stuff that actually doesn't really belong in there per se. Like that's more for like stuff that's like, we can talk about stuff going on at NI that nobody else is supposed to know because we have like special access or whatever. NI tells us things that they don't want to tell everybody. But we end up having a lot of discussions around software engineering and other topics in there that really don't have anything to do with NI's secret sauce or anything. And they could be had on the forums and bringing more people into those discussions.
It's a two-edged sword, because I mean, I'm being critical of the lack of communication between different levels, and yet I'm doing exactly the same thing that you're saying, that when I go to the LabVIEW forums, first forum I check is the LabVIEW Champions forum.
Yeah. And if I have a really difficult question, I tend to post it on the LabVIEw Champions forum because I know I'm going to get qualified responses there. And that's great, but then everybody else who's not a part of that forum is missing out on the opportunity to learn something.
Exactly. So I think you kind of have to find the balance between having that ability to talk among people who you have at least a feeling you're going to get the response that you're looking for, without alienating everybody else. And that's, I don't think there is a perfect solution to that, but I think we need to be wary of that a little bit in the community. Yeah,
and you had also mentioned too, and I've seen this a little bit too, that like, answering questions from beginners, sometimes people have issues with that. With doing it with empathy, I guess, would be the correct.
And again, I go back to the people who were on the forum when I was starting, like Ben Rayner, for me, is one of the guys that got me into LabVIEW. And
I lived in Pittsburgh, so I'd met Ben several times before I ever became a LabVIEW.
Unfortunately, I never met him, but he was the guy who...
He was a character.
Yeah, I really like Ben because he met everybody at the same level. And he was welcoming of everybody, and he kind of made everybody feel like you were worth his time, which was nice. And that's really what got me into the forums. And I'm struggling to think of someone who would take that position. I mean, there are some people there who have typically been that way, but again...
Well, we kind of struggle with that at GDevCon NA, and we struggle with it here too, I think, is that people who it's their first time at a conference, we don't have a good way to like bring them in and introduce them to people. Like, sometimes like somebody who's a LabVIEW champion, really gregarious, like for example, Jeremy Marquis or some of those people, or Jeff DeBerg, they will bring somebody to a conference and they know everybody. And so they take them around and introduce them to everybody. But if you just show up, you buy a ticket and you don't know anybody, like it's very, very hard to break in that door and get to know people. And it's not that like any of us are like I will say hi and talk to anybody because we're at a conference. But like part of it is I think we're all software engineers. We're all slightly introverted in some way.
Yeah.
Or at least like not as social butterflies as we could be.
Yeah. I mean, my first GDevCon when I walked in Cambridge, I was terrified.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew all these people online, and I knew that I kind of knew what I was talking about, but at the same time,
yeah,
it's different, you know, and it's hard to get into groups because a lot of the groups kind of already know each other and they all have kind of pre-built groups, and it's hard to change that. It's hard to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also a little bit, I was talking with Steve just recently about imposter syndrome and stuff. And yeah, Steve has a very interesting opinion on that. He's like, basically, he's like, can you do the work? Great. Then you're not an imposter. He's like, you know, and it, like, are you just learning something? Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's okay. You're not an expert. That's okay. It's just like, it's kind of like this self-awareness thing of like knowing where you are. It's really hard, actually.
Yeah. That's an interesting topic. Because I've struggled with that my entire life. This is going to get a little bit off topic now, but you can have imposter syndrome on different levels, right? And I learned at a very early age to separate out my knowledge and what I'm doing from my sense of myself.
Yes, that's a very, that's difficult to do.
And it's a really important step to make, but at the same time, once somebody starts approaching me as a person, then the imposter syndrome kicks in. So I know that I appear kind of arrogant and standoffish at times, but that's just because I kind of suffer from social anxiety and I kind of panic in those situations. So it's a weird mix. So like, for example, in GDevCon, the more we focus on the technical aspects, the more I kind of feel at home.
Okay.
So when we're focusing like on what we do day to day, I don't have a problem interacting with that and giving my opinion. Yeah. But the minute it drifts away from that, I have an issue. It's not that I have an issue, it's just I find it hard to engage in that level. I automatically become kind of standoffish. And I know how that looks from the outside and it's not intentional, but I can't do it any other way. Yeah, so I think what Steve is saying is correct, and especially on a technical level. I have no problem discussing any level of technical things with anybody. Mm-hmm. But once the focus shifts, it changes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know from a personal level, like I like the technical discussion and that's good, but I get more value out of the higher level discussion of more like workflows and how we interact with people and those type of things, and more of like the principle thing. Because part of my problem is if you understand how to do something, that's one thing. But to understand why you do it that way, because if you understand how to do something on FPGA, that's great. And then you go try to do the same thing on LabVIEW and it's not necessarily the same. But if you understand the principle of why it works over here, and you can take the principle and apply it over here, it's much more transferable, I think. Yeah.
And I love those discussions. I mean, the last two GDevCons, we had some really interesting discussions, which for me worked because we started kind of in a small group. And it was kind of manageable. But doing that within a group. And last time in Birmingham, somebody said to me that I should give a talk on the FPGA. And I was like, oh, that's not going to happen. There's no way I could stand up there and give a talk. And then they offered to hold the talk for me, which I thought was a really nice gesture. But for me, that's still a technical discussion.
Oh, well, I would love to get here. I know very little about FPGA. I've done tiny little bits of it. I would love to sit and listen to you talk about FPGA because, you seem very knowledgeable. I think you'd have a lot of wisdom to share. So, and
just getting back to the same topic, the immediate thing going through my head was I don't know if I know a lot because I don't know what other people know.
But that's good though, because that means like on the Dunning-Kruger curve, you're like past the point of like. You've reached the point where you're like, I don't know what I don't know kind of thing.
Well, I know what I know, but I don't know how much there still is that I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. What a useless answer. I've had the urge is kind of within me a little bit to give a talk on those topics. What I really found interesting was during COVID, we had kind of a virtual conference. And I really like that because I think that lowers the barrier for people to actually give a talk because you don't actually see the 200 people in front of you. It's a different approach. So I definitely felt encouraged by that kind of thing. And I think maybe that would be good for the community when we get back to bringing people into the community, getting people involved. I think giving presentations on that level is more accessible. That's
very interesting. So this is, again, me personally. I totally see where you're coming from. For me, I hate giving virtual presentations because I get no audience feedback. So for me, I like being able to see people, like I say something and I look at people's faces, I see somebody give me a weird look. I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't explain that well enough. Or I crack a joke and nobody laughs, like, okay, that was a bad joke or whatever.
Well, they said there's a difference. If I'm giving a talk and someone gives me a weird look, I'd probably walk out of the other time.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah. Well, it is hard when you do get that weird look to like not take it personally and not like let it throw you off, to just be like, oh, okay, they're not getting it. Let me try to explain it a different way or something, as opposed to like, oh, I'm an idiot, I didn't do it right. Like, that self.
And that's for me, like what I said earlier, the different levels of imposter syndrome, that's somewhere where for me they coincide. They both meet. I know what I'm talking about technically, that's not the issue, but presenting then is kind of more of a personal thing rather than a technical thing for me, at least.
Yeah, well, I mean, presenting is a skill, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't do it often, it takes a while to build it up. And some people seem to be naturals at it. I really doubt anybody's 100% natural at it. Like, I mean, maybe there are people, but I mean, I give a lot of presentations and I seem to do all right, but it was not always that way.
Yeah. Oh, it's a really hard thing for me to do. It's very difficult.
Well, I got into that because I was in this climbing club in Pittsburgh, and they were looking for somebody to be president. The guy who was the president was stepping down and nobody volunteered. And I'm like, I don't know, I have this weird thing where I can't stand like a power vacuum thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't ever want to be in charge, but if nobody's doing it and everybody's sitting around like looking at each other, I'm like, okay, great, I'll do it. And so I volunteered to do that, and I had to run meetings, and the first couple of meetings were brutal.
Yeah.
It was like really hard, but finally I found my groove, and it really helped me come out of my shell, because every month I was standing up in front of a group of people and talking, and so that really helped.
It's funny because the same thing happened to me with sports club in Basel. We have the Gaelic sports club in Basel that we were talking about before, and needed a chairman. Nobody was doing it, so I said, "Oh, can't leave that position unfilled. I'll do it." Of course, being a chairman means you have to talk to people.
Yeah, I know.
It occurred to me afterwards was maybe not a good situation to be in. So I had the opposite experience, that I tried to get into it and I tried to kind of force myself to grow into it. It didn't work. Just didn't work. And I tried and I really put effort into doing it and it just failed catastrophically every time. So
yeah, I think for me with the Explorers Club being president, it got easier when I realized that I'm getting up and I'm standing in front of a bunch of people, but they're all people I know and I'm friends with. And it was like and I wasn't really presenting. I was just kind of like reading down a list of like, okay, we got to talk about this. We got to talk about this. And it was very much like, here's my checklist of what. There was no like extemporaneous thing. I didn't have to come up with what to say. Like the agenda was like, these are the business items. So.
No, I completely get that. I have that as well. But for me, the time barrier is maybe knowing someone for 20 years and then a group of maximum 5 people.
Oh, yeah.
And then anything beyond that, anything outside of that doesn't really work for me. So there are situations where I can do that, but they're kind of pretty extreme on the...
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of what makes me comfortable talking at LabVIEW events, because I look out in the crowd and I see a lot of friendly, familiar faces and people I know and people who I have a relationship with and seem to like me. So like, I know that if I flub it a little bit, they're not going to be like all upset with me, right? We'll all still go grab a beer afterwards and be friends and talk.
Exactly.
Yeah. Although I was talking to Steve about this too. There is this idea that software is like a mental creation and it's in your head. And when you put it out there, you're making yourself vulnerable, because you can always present ideas like you might think you're really good at FPGA program or whatever, right? But if you don't have anyone to compare it to or anything, you don't know if you're any good or not. And so you throw the idea out there and there's always this fear that like somebody's going to say, that's really dumb. Why'd you do that? Like, and part of it is, I think, changing our favorite reference. So like if you throw your idea out there and somebody says, that's really dumb, why did you do it that way? You could take that as, oh, they're attacking me. But you could also take it as, oh, there's an easier way to do it.
Exactly.
I've been doing it the hard way all the time. Like,
exactly.
And you can view that as a learning opportunity in a way. So one of the questions I like to ask people, and I didn't really prep you well for this, so I apologize if it's catching you off guard, is to ask people to talk about a time when they tried something, whatever it is, and it didn't work the way you thought it would. And to kind of remove that stigma of like, oh, you failed, and turn it into, oh, I learned something. So, and I mean, maybe it was just like, I became president of this club and I realized that I'm not really good at public speaking. It's not really my thing.
That was definitely one. I was self-employed for a brief period. Tried to get into
LabVIEW we talked about this earlier.
That did not work. I'm not suited to that type of work at all.
Well, that's also a learning experience for a lot of people. Yeah.
And again, it was the kind of thing I'm going to try to force myself to grow into it. And again, no, that didn't work.
Well, it's that stubbornness and persistence thing, right? Like sometimes you're beating your head against the wall and the wall is not moving and you just need to stop. And sometimes you're beating your head against the wall and the wall's slowly moving. And you just need to keep going to get through it, right?
No, but it's when you're banging your head against the wall and the wall's getting stronger.
Yeah.
then you know you have to stop.
Yeah.
That's
Well, I
not
used
gonna
to
work.
work at this company, and I constantly, one of my says, I'm banging my head against the wall, and something's getting softer, and it's not.
Yeah. It's either
It's
the
not
wall or my head. Yeah.
Yeah. Something's
No.
not changing here.
Yeah. I mean, there's been things technically that you come up with this great idea in LabVIEW. Oh, I'm going to do it this way. This is going to solve so many problems. And you implement like 90% of it, and you realize, okay, this isn't going to work. This is a complete waste of
that
time.
10% is really important.
Yeah.
And I missed something there.
That 10% far outweighs the 90%. So yeah, that's not going to work.
Yeah, no, I think everybody's had that.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Without going into any details, it's all been there.
Yeah. No, I guess the question there is like, do you then throw that away, or like how do you recover from that?
And I think the ideas behind them, a lot of the time it comes down to the technical implementation, and specifically in LabVIEW, we're kind of tied to the way things are implemented in LabVIEW. Sometimes it just boils down to the way things are implemented, that it doesn't work. But most of the time for me, the ideas are generally sound. It's just the way of going about implementing it are not the optimal way of doing it.
So you keep the idea,
Absolutely.
you change it because the implementation uses too much memory or doesn't fit. In your case on FPGA, it doesn't fit.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So like, this is really the way to do it. I just need to massage something so I can make it fit.
So it mutates into this. It would be cool if, but then the if kind of becomes a problem.
It'd be cool if you could do this in LabVIEW, but you can't.
You can't,
so
exactly.
I've got to like figure out a way around it. Yeah. It's almost like that hacker mentality of like, tried this, it didn't work. Okay, well, try going around the door instead of through it or something. Yeah.
So I love bringing up a piece of code from Doom 3, actually from id Software, the evil bit hack, for anybody who's familiar with it.
Wait, what is this?
From Doom 3. So it was getting the inverse square root.
Oh, it's the Conway thing where you like calculate really strange?
Yeah.
Please tell me, because I don't know the whole story.
You basically take an integer, you cast it to... No, you take a single value, a floating point value, you cast it to a pointer to an integer, which allows you to get around the type safety in C, and then you subtract a certain value from it as a floating, as an integer, and then cast it back to the floating point number, and then it's within like 1% of the inverse square root of the value.
And it's way quicker than doing it any other way.
At the time, it was 3 times faster than anything else. And the only comment in the source code beside it is like, WTF. How does this work?
Yeah. What was the guy's name who wrote that?
John Carmack made it famous, but he himself says he didn't write it. It didn't come from him.
No, he just wrote the comment.
Yeah. I think it was Abrash or somebody from Microsoft he had hired on the team, and he had brought it in, but even he says it came from someone else, and it's kind of disputed as to where it actually comes from.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those pieces of code where you're like, ugh. How does that work?
So all the people who say you don't need comments, that one probably needs a comment.
It was a very clear comment that nobody understands how it works.
Yeah.
But
well, nobody does understand, but it works.
Yeah, it worked. Well, it did. Now we have square root efficiently on the CPU, so it's not really needed anymore.
So they implement it down to silicon or something.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
How like over the years, all those things have kind of gotten pushed down into like their own dedicated chips.
Yeah. Which is why I kind of like FPGA. It's kind of back to the old days of hacking the Commodore 64 kind of microcomputer era, where you were seriously constrained by memory and by system resources. I like that because it forces you to think differently.
Yeah. So question, because I do know FPGA is a very different thought process. Can you comment on the difference for those who haven't programmed FPGA?
Mm-hmm.
What is the mental switch going from LabVIEW to FPGA? Like, can you kind of sum it up? And I'm sure it's not one sentence, but
I've two main points. One is that objects work way better on FPGA than on non-FPGA, in my opinion.
Actually, that's one of the things, because you were the one who put me onto that. You could actually use objects.
They're fantastic on FPGA.
You just can't do dynamic dispatch.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, you can,
but it has
you need to be careful how you do it.
Yeah, constant. Yeah,
you need to be careful how
you
implement it.
So that the FPGA knows which one to use.
Exactly. Yeah. And that kind of ties into the other point I was going to say, is that everything, no matter how you program it with case structures, is inherently all running at the same time. So on Windows or on real time, we're kind of used to having a chain start to finish, and you have a timing that needs to be met.
Yep.
All right. So you have a case structure here, case structure here. In one case, the first one takes longer, the second one takes shorter time, and the other way around in the other case, so shorter time, longer time. And that works on real time or on CPU. That doesn't work on FPGA. On FPGA, everything is inherently parallel, and then you're just switching between them on the fly. So the total time is the longest possible combination of any of those calculations. And that determines the timing that you can meet. So we work exclusively with single cycle timed loops. Mm-hmm. So we can only compile what fits into one clock cycle. So we need to get into pipelining and all of this kind of things to get that working.
Pipelining is a very interesting thing.
And I have my own set of object-oriented things on FPGA that kind of helps me get around that.
Okay.
which is probably, if I was giving a talk, what I would give the talk on. So that kind of helps with the load balancing, that you can basically tell everything that has a deadline what the deadline is, and then it automatically presents the data at the correct clock cycle.
Oh.
And that's done in a relatively resource efficient way. That it helps abstract out the level of pipelining.
Yeah, well, resource efficiency is a big thing, right? Because you only got so much space.
Yeah. That's a big thing that we work on, because we're still got all of our company I work for, Spec-Zurich product line is known as. We do hardware and software for SPM applications, scanning probe microscopy, or AFM, or cryogenic physics applications. So we need a lot of functionality on the FPGA, because we have spectroscopy, sweeps, oscilloscopes, PI controllers, all of that on a single FPGA target. So we need to be careful of the resources we're using to fit everything on it. And one of the main points that I work on the FPGA is basically making it fit. And making it fit in such a way that it's also compilable, because you run into routing errors, or routing errors, depending on how you pronounce it.
Oh yeah, because you've got all the stuff, but you've only got so many interconnects. If you use them all up,
exactly,
then you can't get the signal there.
You can only have so many clocks per tile, and all of these things that you technically don't need to know when you're programming LabVIEW, but when you start pushing the limits, you learn.
Yeah, because you're much closer to the hardware. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm programming LabVIEW, but I have meanwhile I'm pretty aware of what's going on the hardware level, and what to avoid and what not to do in order to get things running efficiently.
So Terry, have you read Terry's book on
No.
the FPGA? Oh, you should get a copy and read it. But he was telling me it's like designing hardware rather than if you think you don't think of it as programming, you think of it as designing hardware. And then obviously you have to interact with it from LabVIEW sometimes, at least, to do stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the programming side. But the FPGA side is actually designing hardware. If you think it that way, it becomes a different game.
I wasn't even aware he had a book. I would have bought it if I knew.
No, yeah, it came out a year or two ago.
Okay,
yeah.
Wasn't even aware of that. Okay.
I'll send you a link or something.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll throw one in the show notes so everybody else can go look. But yeah, it's good. It's like a tour of FPGA. Honestly, I read it and 90% of it went over my head, but I don't do much FPGA stuff. So, but it's super detailed and yeah.
It's a real learning experience. I mean, I'm doing it now since, I don't know, 6 years. Programming FPGA, just programmed purely on
only
Windows.
6 years?
Only
I thought you
6
used to do
years,
way more than that. Yeah.
I'm programming since 20 years.
Yeah.
But
Just
the company I'm in now, that I'm employed now, I'm there 10 years, I think, maybe 11 years.
Yeah.
The first few years were purely host, and then real time, and then even getting onto real time is a change in mentality.
Yeah. So question, when you're doing FPGA stuff, are you doing the CVO FPGAs or like the PXI?
We are on a Vertex 5
Okay.
FlexRio target mostly. We also have a Kintex 7, but that's...
Because I've also heard, and I think I got this from Terry, that programming the backplane of a compact Rio is actually very different than programming one of those big R series. Just like the programming is the same, but like the task that you use them for is very different.
Oh, really? Okay.
That's what he said. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm really much focused on the one target that we're using. I haven't had reason to go outside of that.
Well, apparently when you switch targets, that also causes problems.
Yeah.
And
we had an issue where
because you're closer to the hardware.
Yeah, but we went to move from the 6965, I think, to the 6966. I probably have the numbers wrong. It's the SX90, I think, chip from the Vertex 5, and one speed grade and the next speed grade. So we were having trouble compiling. We thought, okay, we'll move to the faster speed grade. But we had some external code implemented that then stopped working because they had built-in delays. So they had deterministic, empirically, they worked out the delays that were required to get the code to work. And then that didn't work on the faster speed grade. So you run into all kinds of weird issues with even speed grades of the same hardware.
Cool. Well, I have another quick question for you. So the last project that I did some FPGA, I worked on it. Terry and I helped this guy, and they had VHDL code running. Do you do any VHDL, or do you just do LabVIEW?
Yeah, well, we're starting into VHDL. Up until now, we did everything with an external partner who understood VHDL, and we worked with them. But we're currently working on a new generation of our hardware, and we're looking at implementing it in a different way, which means we have to generate some custom VHDL, but we want to keep that know-how in-house.
Yeah.
So we recently have a new employee who has a bit of experience in VHDL in that direction, so we're kind of moving a little bit in that direction now.
Well, I mean, the main selling point of LabVIEW FPGA is you don't have to learn VHDL.
Exactly.
But then at some point, I think you hit performance limits where like the LabVIEW code just doesn't compile well enough or whatever, the clock limits, and you can do
exactly.
Things
It helps you smooth out some of those edges that the LabVIEW IDE kind of forces you into.
Yeah.
Very
cool. No, it's been a great conversation. I'm quite enjoying it. I wish it could go on longer, But yeah, we're coming up on time. So any last minute thoughts or?
Not really. You kind of
It's an honest answer.
Of all the questions you gave me,
Put
that
you
one
right
puts me on the spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Be nice to each other.
Yeah, I think that's a good thought. I mean, I think as a community, we could probably do a better job of that.
Yeah. And meet people and eye to eye as human beings. That's all that's necessary. The rest kind of comes from that.
Yeah, no, I like that. Like treating people like human beings
Yeah.
and just kind of seeing the humanity. It's good.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, Shane. I very
Thanks.
much appreciate your time.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at @TheLVExperiment so you never miss an episode. And remember, small steps and quick feedback are all you need. Catch you next time.